Good morning. Today's date is December 4th, 2007. My name is Tyrone Belanger. Today I will be conducting an oral history interview with Al Cirone for the Veterans History Project in partnership with the Dalton Council on Aging. This interview is being held at the Dalton Community Television Studio in Dalton, Massachusetts. Good morning, Al.
Good morning, Ty.
Would you please state your full name and spell your last name?
Albert J. Cirone, C-I-R-O-N-E.
Where do you presently live?
On 3 McKinley Street in Adams, Massachusetts, 01220.
What is your date of birth and where were you born?
August 26, 1920, in North Adams, Mass.
Did you grow up and go to school there?
Yes.
What was life like growing up at that time, you know, during the Depression?
Well, I've got to say it was not too hard for me because my father was in a trucking business, and whenever work was available, he was able to grab it and do the sort of things that the trucking business was unable to do so. And we always had food on the table, and but I can remember the lines that used to be formed in the welfare department, seeking food stamps or food distributions. That sort of thing. As far as I was concerned, I had to toe the line a great deal, and I had chores to do. I was not able to do the things that youth has a chance to do and the things to do in their lives today.
We had it a little bit easier, but you had to continue, you had to work yourself also?
Yes. We had a large garden, and my brother and I, we had to plow the garden, make sure that we had to weed the garden and that sort of thing, and pick up the crop thereafter. It was something that my father always believed that idle hands would get you
in trouble. Oh, he instilled a good work habit.
Yes, yes, that much I can say, that we, at the time I didn't think so, but looking back on life, yes, there were good work habits.
You mentioned a couple of games that you and the kids used to play.
Oh, yes. Games that we used to play was, well, Run Sheep Run, or Kick the Can, that sort of thing. You know, it was just tag or that sort of thing. But we enjoyed ourselves, just
you didn't need
doing
much
the games or playing ball in our backyard. Our backyard was just a dirt driveway, and I can recall my sister, my older sister, who we used to play with. Her name was Rose, and I can recall her at bat. And there was a garage in the distance, not too far, but in the distance. She pounds that ball and it goes through the neighbor's garage, and the window broke. And I guess we were told about it. And so my sister was a good ball player. And
she sort of showed the boys up a little bit.
She sure did.
So you had a sister. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I did have another sister, and she was younger. She was younger than I was. And along with my older sister, I had an older brother, and I had a younger brother. So there were 5 of us in the family.
I think you mentioned you were in the middle. You were in between the brothers and sisters?
Correct.
Yeah.
I was the middle one.
Now, would your brothers join the service? Were they in the service also?
Yes, my brother Joseph was his name, and is his name, and he was in the Navy also, and he fought in some of the major battles out in the South Pacific, Battle of Gulf of Tonkin, and he was on the USS Nicholas, and it was a destroyer, and he was a boatswain's mate.
And he made it back.
He made it back, yes. And he lives in the state of Florida, and he's 91 years old. He will be, yes, he's 91 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you had a younger brother.
I had a younger brother, yes, who unfortunately he passed away. His name was Anthony, and he was a namesake of my father's. And at one time I can recall that there was a heavy snowstorm. In those days, in order to get the snow plowed from the streets in town of North Adams, there were gang crews of shoveling snow into the truck instead of these payloaders that they have today in regard to removing the snow. And after he had finished, as a matter of fact, he was a junior in high school at the time, and school was let out there. And he asked my mother to go and shovel snow because he had the day off. We figured he'd earn some
Make
money
a little extra money.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he came home that day, and he was sitting on the step, and his feet were all wet, and there was a step leading up to the upstairs apartment. And I says, "What's the matter, Tut?" And we used to call him Tut. And he says, "Well, I don't feel." And his face was so flushed, and remembering, you know, this day that he didn't want to eat any supper, and he went to lay down. He took a shower, and he took a bath. We didn't have a shower. We took a bath.
Yeah.
And he went to lay down, and lo and behold, he didn't last too long, because we called a doctor after my mother detected he had a fever, and the doctor came up and he checked them all out, and come to find out he had lower pneumonia. And in those days they didn't have penicillin to give him, and they didn't give him any chance at all to live, and he passed away that night.
He was, you said 16?
He was 17 years
17?
old. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And what did your father do for a living?
My father was in the trucking business. He always owned a truck and a couple of trucks. And he would at times be hired out, whereby Arnold Print Works would have these engraving rolls that had to be shipped down to New Jersey, and he, along with other truckers, would load these engraving rolls to be shipped down to New Jersey, and they would rework them if there was any flaws in the engraving images on the engraving rolls, and they would rectify them, and then they'd get down to pick them up. And this was for the Arnold Print Works at the time, was a large employer for the city of North Adams or the surrounding communities.
Yeah. That was a long trip. He drove all the way to New Jersey?
All the way to New Jersey. Yeah. In those days, yes, with those type of trucks. And they, yes, I agree with you. It was a long...
There were no turnpikes or anything?
No, there was not.
Was your father a veteran?
Well, not in the American sense, a veteran, but I know he had fought for the army in Italy, and I know he fought in the War of Ethiopia at the time, and he used to show me the bullet when they were entered his arm.
Oh, really?
And they got it out all right for him, and he came home and he settled back in Italy, and then it wasn't too long that he decided to come to the United States, because he had a sister here that was already here in the United States, and she was in Chicago at the time. And that's when he decided to come to the Americas.
He married in Italy. Your mother is from Italy?
Yes, my mother is from Italy, and her name was Maria, and she came here. She was married in Italy, but she didn't come along with my father at the time. She came at a later date, and then they got together and they purchased. I think they purchased the house. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I think they. No.
This is in North
At a
Adams?
loss. Yes, this was in North Adams. Yeah. But finally they settled in North Adams at the time, and they decided over a period of time they own their own house, and it was a 4 tenement house in which they purchased, and from there that's where I was born. I wasn't born in the hospital, but all my brothers and sisters were born at home, except with the exception, I guess, for my brother, kid brother. He was born in the hospital, but all of us were born.
All born in the home.
Right.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes, I did, in 1939.
What school?
Yes, in Drury High School.
Drury High School, okay.
Right.
What did you do after you finished high school? You were 18, 17, 18, 17?
Yeah, well, during that period of time, there wasn't much work around. I know at the time, well, there was a period of time I can recall whereby I had, Maximilian was the contractor, and he had a bunch of bricks down in one area off West Main Street, and he had us really, any of those who wanted clean bricks, and what I mean clean bricks was bricks with mortar on them, and we used to chip the mortar away, and we had to stack those bricks in a 4x8 pile. Now a 4x8 pile consisted of 1,000 bricks.
Wow.
And he would pay us 50 cents a day for cleaning bricks. And I come home after a few days of work. My mother would tell me, she says, "You know, Albert," she says, "it's costing us more for lunch for you to go clean bricks." But she says, "That's all right." She says, "I know where you're at, and that you're not getting into trouble." So that was one of the few jobs that I had, and I can recall too working at Gale Shoe Shop. Gale Shoe Shop was a shop in which they manufactured shoes, the finished product. It started from scratch, and were the uppers, the heelers, and I was what they call a nailer. And as a matter of fact, that's where I met my wife. She came looking for a job, and I was looking out the window, and she was with another girlfriend of hers, and I looked down, and she says, "Can you," because there used to be a gate in which anybody who was looking for a job, they had to pass through this gate. And she says, "I can't get in to look for a job." I said, "Wait a minute." I says, "I'll come down there and open the gate for you to be interviewed." And that was the beginning of our romance, really. And I got to date her, and we used to go out. And from
Eventually,
there,
yeah.
From there was our beginning of our romance and marriage, subsequently.
Now, you also mentioned something about the Hoosick Tunnel. Is that?
Oh, yes. Let me elaborate on that. In Hoosick Tunnel, there was a gang crew who would do all electrical work and replace ties that would need to replace ties, and also rails that needed replacing. And in those days, there used to be only a single track. And they needed a water boy, so I applied for the water boy job. Now, water boy was consisted of an individual with a galvanized pail, 10-quart pail, and a dipper. And it had certain areas in the tunnel in which had spring water. And I would walk to the spring, bring back the pail of water for the crew to be drinking as they got thirsty. So, talking about from a health point of view, everybody drank from the same dipper.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, you know, looking back at things today whereby, oh, you can't drink from the same cup or use the same spoon or that sort of thing. But there were different people of different ethnic groups, and they were all drink from the same dipper. And get back, also, there was a period of time in which they have niches in the wall of the tunnel in which, if they knew at a certain time with time schedules that the trains would be arriving in the tunnel, you would always hide in these little niches, so the pressure that was created by the train going by would be so much so that you could be dragged right into the
Really?
train. Yes, you had to be careful. So that's why they had these niches in the wall in which you were safe in those niches, and you had to make sure that you were in those areas whereby you wouldn't get sucked into the train. And ironically, when I was in the service, there used to be this old individual who used to make sure that, Albert, I want you to make sure you get into those niches. Don't stay outside of them. So one day while I was in the service, I received a letter from my sister. She says, you know what, Mr. Demenicini got killed on the railroad. And I said, God, I said, and he's the one that always made sure that I had to be placed in one of those niches, and there he got killed during that period of time.
That had to be a very dangerous job, working in that tunnel.
It was. For the rail workers, yes, it was. It was a dangerous job, and it was heavy work. Believe me, it was heavy work.
Yeah.
Not for me, but for the workers themselves.
For the crews, yeah.
It was always crews in which handled tongs in order to get the ties in underneath the rail and that sort of thing, and then banging the spikes.
And there must have been a time period that they had to get this done because they knew there was going to be a train coming.
Yes, that's true. And especially when they had to repair a track. Let's say if there was a derailment in a tunnel, okay, they had to make sure that they had to get the rest of the train on the track, an individual track if there was, and make sure that no other trains were coming through, so they'd hold them up on, let's say, the west portal of the tunnel, and it all depends which way these trains were operating up and coming from.
I just thought of another question. You mentioned that there was one track. Did they eventually make it 2 tracks through the tunnel?
Yes, they did eventually
Okay,
make 2 tracks. As a matter of fact, nowadays, in order to get these boxcars through the tunnel, in which they're higher than they were in those days, I understand through word of mouth that they had lowered the tunnel floor in order for these big boxcars now, with the heights that they were, are, and in order to get through the tunnel. And they had completed this, I understand, to my knowledge.
I never thought about the size of the cars today, till back then.
True.
What year was that? Do you remember what year? I think you...
well, it'd have to be 37, 38,
okay.
36.
All right. Were you drafted, or did you enlist in
No, I enlisted. The enlistment was kind of odd because there was a group of us hanging around. We didn't have anything to do, and at the time, you know, jobs didn't last that very long, you know, and maybe 2 weeks if you lasted on a job.
a lot of part-time jobs?
Yeah, right. And you picked up anything that that was available. So let me get my train of thoughts back. What were we saying now?
About enlisting.
Oh,
You enlisted in...
yes, I did enlist. Yeah, oh, yes, and there was a bunch of us hanging around one day, and it says, and we heard that war was declared, and immediately we went down, came down to Pittsfield, and signed up. When we signed up, we were sent down to Springfield for examination. And I think this is what you're trying to get out of me, and which what happened during that period of time. Is that correct?
What branch did you, when you signed, what branch did you join?
Navy.
Navy, okay.
Yep. And during the time we were down in Springfield, there was hundreds of us, you know, for enlistment. So by the time we got chosen to be examined by the examiner down there and the doctors, and we would lay around, I'd be reading a book, and poor lighting, and by the time I got around to be examined, I failed the eye examination. I can't believe it. I really couldn't believe that I failed the eye examination, because I always had 20/20 vision.
Yeah.
And so lo and behold, they told me to go back home and look at the horizon and strengthen my eyes that way, and come back in 14 days. There is a ironic condition that existed at that time, and people that I went down with, they had the same last initial to their names and their last names. A friend of mine whose name was Dominic Corsi at the time, and I was Cirone with a C. And we're at boot camp at the time. No, we were supposed to be at boot camp at the same time that he was. And in doing so, he had passed and I had failed, and give you a little history of what happened to that individual, because it really how faith plays an important part in your life, I believe, and whereby he was on a shakedown cruise at the time that he was assigned to a ship at that time, and they were up and down with the shakedown cruise with their destroyer up along the North Atlantic. And to this day, as far as my knowledge is concerned, that they could never find any one of those individuals that went down with that ship. They don't know how it went down, and it was a brand new ship. They were trying to take the bugs out of the ship during a shakedown cruise.
Yeah.
And to this day,
the ship, they never found the ship either?
They never found.
So they have no idea whatever happened to them?
Not at all. And ironically, if I had passed the first time around, I would have been on that ship. And I think the good Lord is looking after me for some reason.
Now, what was the date that you went down to join? I know you mentioned it.
It's, I think it was...
It was not too long after Pearl Harbor.
Yes, let me see, January, December, I think it was. Yeah, December, I think it was the 14th of December.
That you enlisted? That you went?
That's right.
Okay. So it wasn't too long after Pearl Harbor?
Not at all. Well, as a matter of fact, when I got, it was almost a day after Pearl Harbor that we went down to join up, and then I got turned down and told me to go back in 14 days, come back. And
all right, so the first day, the first time you signed up was right the day after Pearl Harbor. Wow.
I believe it was, yes, I believe it was.
I think just about half the country did, I guess, or close to it. How old were you when you
I was
joined us?
21.
You were 21.
Yeah, I'll give you a little history. Right, the day that I joined, I came home that day. I don't know, my mother got wind of that I had joined, and I could picture her to this day. She was by the bedroom window. She was crying. And she says, "Albert, what did you do?" And she spoke in Italian. I said, "Ma," I said, I wanted to join a branch of the service that I was interested in. I didn't want to go in the Army, I said, or the Marines. I said, I wanted the Navy. She's crying, "Why didn't you wait? Why didn't you wait till the draft?" I said, "No, I didn't. I don't want to wait till the draft." So my brother then came home. He said, "I'm the oldest one. I should have gone before you." I said, "Well, Joe," I said, "I beat you to it."
Do you remember the exact dates of your military service?
Yes, from, like I said, 41 up through 1945, September, I think it was, my date of discharge.
Yeah, right. Now, why did you join the Navy? I know you said you didn't want to join the Army, and you didn't want to join the Marine Corps. Was there a specific reason that
you... I think it was a cleaner to the point whereby, if you were placed on a ship, you had your cooks and everybody there, and I think it was a cleaner atmosphere, and I didn't have to drudge through mud and seeing some of my friends that were in the Army writing back or meeting them when they were on leave who were drafted much sooner than I was, and there's hardships that they were going through, and I said, well...
So you wanted it easy, as much as you could.
Correct.
I don't blame you. Where were you sent for boot camp once you got in? Where was your boot camp training?
Yes, my boot camp days was at Newport, Rhode Island. I spent 15 days, believe it or not, at boot camp, and I figured I was going to be there longer. And after boot camp, I thought, well, during a period of time there, I thought probably I'd get a leave because I had never been away from home before in my life. And I figured, well, I go home, with my sailor uniform, and I'd be proud of the peacock. And it didn't happen. From boot camp, we went to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and it was a fairly new U.S. Naval Air Station at San Juan, Puerto Rico, and that's where I spent the next 15 months of my career in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
I just want to go back a little bit as to boot camp. What kind of training did you get while you were in boot camp?
Well, boot camp, as you can see, if some of the photos were shown, we would have a rifle, and each time we would get up in the morning, there was our chief petty officer who was the head of our crew, and we'd have about probably 15 or 20 individuals. We'd get up at early in the morning and form a group and go through marching procedures, and our chief was named, we had a nickname for him, Popeye, and he was rough. He was short, but he was a sturdy individual, and he had many years in the Navy, and he knew all the ins and outs of Navy personnel at that time. So.
But you did train with a rifle, you mentioned. You know,
Yes, as a matter of fact, we did train with a rifle. As
I thought that was interesting because
yes, and they had a bayonet at the end of these rifles too. I don't know whether it was a prod.
So you didn't get any leave after boot camp, and you went right down to Puerto Rico.
None at all. No.
How did you get down to Puerto Rico?
We boarded a transport. I believe we took a train down to Norfolk, Virginia, and there was a large group of us that were assigned there, and we got on this transport, and we sailed down to Puerto Rico. And then
I'm going to ask you a tough question. Do you remember the name of the ship?
Not at all.
You don't remember that name of that ship?
It was a transport, and I didn't know.
Well, you know, it took me a long time to remember mine. Let's see. Can you describe the day that you came home after? Wait a minute. When you were in San Juan, Puerto Rico, what type of training did you get then? You were there for 15 months. You must have gotten training?
Sure. As a matter of fact, that's where a great deal of my ranks were in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Had a time, and in order to do some studying, and when the time came along whereby I was eligible to apply for my next rank, I would apply, and as being a new station, you know, there were far and in between ranks to be applied to that group. So I was fortunate enough to attain those ranks in a certain periods of time in which I was allowed to do so. And so my main duties were in a machine shop in which they had civilian Puerto Rican machinists in their machine shops. And they would do most of the repairs for ships that came into dock that needed ship repairs. And that's what generally they were involved with.
So you were working on large equipment.
There was a large group there in the machine shop, yes, civilians and Navy personnel.
Now, was it there, you mentioned something about the rudders, not the rudder, but you talked about the bearings.
Well, that came after.
That came after?
Yes, much later after. After I left San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Okay, all right. Now, yeah, okay. So you did get, when you were after San Juan, Puerto Rico, you did get some type of leave.
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, I got 15 days leave. And in order to get to my home in that day, they loaded us up in a PBM. Now, a PBM flying ship was a large cargo ship, and they didn't have any seats in there. And they just loaded us in there like cattle, really, sitting on the floor of this transport airplane. So we first had to land, where did we land? We landed in Cuba. We had to land in, for some reason we had to land in Cuba. Yeah, we landed in Cuba, and in doing so, apparently the ship one of the ships that were anchored or a boat or whatever it was.
In Cuba?
Yes.
Yeah.
It lost its mooring, and it floated right into the plane that I was going home on. I said, God, of all the times that this thing had to come into him, and here I am going home on leave. I'm going to leave. I'm going to lose a day of my leave. Sure enough, I lost a day, and they checked the craft over, and they found that it wasn't damaged, and we were able to fly from Cuba up to, as a matter of fact, was Guantanamo Bay. And we flew up to Miami. And from Miami, we had to take a train up to New York. And I never smoked in my life up until that period of time. When we're coming up to New York, jeepers, those cars were lined up with soldiers, Marines, Navy personnel. And they were packed in there, you know. It was large train sections.
They're like basically a troop transport, but in the train, it was just all military?
Correct, all military, strictly military. And boy, these cars were full of smoke. I said, God, if I got to inhale all this stuff, I better start smoking. So that's what I started smoking. As a matter of fact, Camels was the first cigarette that I smoked, because my father used to smoke Camels. And so I said, well, I'll smoke a Camel. I started off with the strongest cigarette there was in the market. And I continued smoking for a long period of time. As a matter of fact, I must have smoked for about 20 years. And then while I was home, and I decided to quit cold turkey.
Great. Now, how did you feel when you got home? You had your uniform on?
Yes.
How did you feel when you got home?
I was happy that I got home, but you know, listening to the conditions that existed when I got home, the rationing of gasoline, the rationing of food, the rationing of butter and meats and all that sort of thing, and I couldn't believe it. Here I was, you know, I'm enjoying the fruits of my labor and everything. You know, everything was available, and
yeah.
So to come back to see the conditions that the civilians were enduring, I couldn't believe it. But I guess they manage.
The civilians gave up an awful lot for the war cause.
Yes, as a matter of fact, yes, they did. I could recall my two sisters working in defensive practice. I forget now where they were working, but yes, they were working at Sprague Electric Company at the time, and Sprague Electric Company, I guess, was a large supplier of different components.
For the military?
Yes.
After leave, where did you next report to?
Yes, after leave, I was assigned, I got notified to report down to Quonset Point, Rhode Island. And for whatever reason I couldn't understand, it was a CB operation there, and it was a station for CBs. I said, why am I being assigned to CBs? I couldn't understand that. And in doing so, when I arrived there, I found that it was a highly confidential operation, to the point whereby word got around up in my neighborhood, and my mother got word of this, and they were wondering why the FBI was checking my character. And my mother got word of this, and she asked my sister, I said, write a letter to her, Albert. Well, what is he doing? Why are they checking upon him? And so I had to tell my sister, I said, don't worry about a thing. I says, there's nothing happening to me, so I can't tell you what's happening. Yeah, but
so it was top secret?
Don't worry about it.
To a certain point, yeah.
Correct.
Now, how long were you there?
I was there, jeepers, you would ask me that. I think late, I think it was before 43.
You weren't there too
Maybe
long,
the
though.
beginning of 43.
Yeah. You mentioned you weren't there too long.
Not at Quonset Point per se. You're right. I wasn't there too long. And the reason why we weren't there too long is because that the station became too small for the operation that we're enduring there. So from there, they decided to move all of the operation down to Port Everglades, Florida. Now, Port Everglades, Florida was a large port in which major ships would come into Port Everglades. And we had access to those ports. And there were large machine shops, large tin shops, tinsmith shops, and the whole unit comprised of Seabees, Army personnel, Marines, Coast Guard, and whoever
else was involved.
branches of service.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question before we go any further. What was the name of your unit? What was your unit called?
All right. The unit was called As Devlant. As Devlant was a synonym for anti-submarine warfare development. And it had to do with strictly making components to counteract German or Japanese submarines. I was chief petty officer in a machine shop, which comprised of about 25 personnel. And there was a machine shop equipped with the most recent machine equipment that were available at the time.
Oh, the up-to-date top?
Strictly top-notch equipment. And you could put out any component that you wanted in that machine shop at that time.
Now, while you were there, you mentioned to me something about the Italian subs that
Oh, yes. In addition, yes, in addition to what existed there, when Italy had declared that they lost the war.
They surrendered?
Surrendered. And these two Italian subs were in the immediate area, and instead of going back to Italy and where the Germans were still in existence, they decided to surrender to the U.S. Navy, U.S. government. And they had full crew, full complements, and we would, yeah, they were noted, the Italian submarines were noted for the deepest diving subs in the world.
At the time?
At that time. And U.S. wanted to know what made them the deepest diving subs in the world. In doing so, we would man them with a U.S. radio man to relay information back to U.S. bases to inform them just what's taking place, this board ship. And also we would have other personnel on there who were knowledgeable about the ship's instrumentations. That
the U.S. personnel would go out with the submarines?
Them, right. And we'd also have destroyer escorts, you know, in the immediate area too. They weren't going anywhere. They didn't want to go anywhere, but they did what we were told them to do, and they complied. And so eventually we found out just what was making these ships dive much further, and it was the radio man, as a matter of fact, I can remember. I don't remember his name, but he was from Brooklyn, and he spoke Italian, so he was able to communicate with the
okay, yeah.
with the ship's captain of the sub and relayed a message back in English to the U.S. base.
I was really surprised when you mentioned that the subs were that close to the United States. I didn't realize it.
It was amazing. It was amazing to the point whereby when we're in San Juan, Puerto Rico, we had PBYs. PBYs was a type of ship in which, airship that could float on water, land on water, and also had wheels they could land on land. And they were mounted with two bombs. You know, when they spotted a German sub in the area, they would go after them, really. And they were close to shore. It was amazing. Many people didn't know this, that how amazing these German subs were around our coastline.
Yeah, I'm learning an awful lot from listening to you fellas, you know, because I never realized that they got that close to the United States.
Yes, as a matter of fact, they had civilian personnel that used to be mounted, not mounted, but guarding the coastline, and whenever they saw a foreign object off the coastline, let's say the periscope or that sort of thing, and they would relay the message back to the personnel that was
to the
in
military.
Make me laugh.
Yeah. You also mentioned two-man subs.
Correct.
You know, where were these from, or
Well, we had how we captured them. I don't have any knowledge, but we happened to capture them and make them part of our unit just to find out what was happening and how they were manned and the type of ships that they were using in order to blow up our ships.
so they could have been captured anywhere out in the Pacific and
Correct.
and then just brought down there.
That's right. And try to learn from, because we never had two-man submarines, and so we just wanted to learn what they were using. Also, along that line, we had German prisoners at our station. These German prisoners were probably prisoners that were in submarines that were blasted out of the ocean, and some of them were fortunate enough to be found afloat in the sea, and they were brought to our station and put in prison. And amazing, you know, some of these units on the guard, I think I believe I heard that they were used in different areas to perform menial labor or something or other. I believe that, and
But these Germans
I can't
were,
be sure about
yeah,
that.
but these Germans were also, say, from German submarines, you thought?
Yes, they were saved from German submarines that were bombed in the South Atlantic.
Now, do you remember the dates you were there? You said you were there for quite a while.
Yes, well,
What was May of '43 till what?
May 43, it had to be to the day that the war was declared over with, in 44 last.
September of '45. Oh, September of '45. I'm sorry. I
Yes.
get it.
You know, and I believe those are the dates are correct. I'm not sure about I'd have to, my memory doesn't.
Oh, you've
serve
done a
me
great
right.
job with your memory so far.
Thank you.
Al, you mentioned, we've been talking about the submarines and the military part of them. Now, were there civilians involved down at Port Lauderdale involving the submarines?
Yes, let me elaborate a little bit more. There were with us three civilians who were noted inventors and designers. Namely, one was a Mr. Pease, who was instrumental in the sonar systems. As you know, sonar systems were just in the works whereby these sonar systems were instrumental in detecting underwater or submarines that the U.S. and Allied members who were members of the Allies, they in turn, this sonar system was a system that would detected enemy ships, and this Mr. Pease was instrumental in the design. I believe he was instrumental in the design of the sonar systems. I know for a fact in our machine shop, in which I was in charge of, they would need parts, say, to set up the sonar systems, and we would manufacture our machine those parts for those sonar systems. So he was on top of everything. So this makes me to believe that he was the original designer of the sonar systems. I could be wrong, but I think he was. Then there was a Mr. Burgess and a Ms. Murray, who worked together in conjunction with the design of different pieces of equipment. Namely, it was the first diesel that was designed in the future to be mounted in our Allied or our U.S. submarines. As you know, the original submarines were battery operated, and in order to maintain those batteries, the submarine had to come afloat and recharge their batteries, and in doing so they were targeted by enemy ships as they were charging their batteries, and they just were targets for the enemy.
I want to interrupt you for a second. How long would a submarine have to be up to recharge?
Well, that I'm not sure of, but it had to be a lengthy part of the time that they charge those batteries in order to stay afloat for any length of time. I mean, submerged for any length of time. In doing so, in their design, it's Mr. Burgess and Ms. Murray. They had designed, I have to laugh because what was involved with in the design of this prototype piece of equipment. At the time, airplanes were equipped with disposable tanks, gasoline tanks for their ships.
Yeah.
And we in turn were able to mount a small diesel engine in one of these disposable tanks, and with outriggers to keep this disposable tank afloat. And on top of this, they had like a counting tower with a bicycle seat that Mr. Burgess, after the manufacture of this, wanted to test it out in the bay. In doing so, he went out into float, and all you could see is Mr. Burgess, who was sitting on top of this bicycle seat and just gliding along the water. And there were fishermen out in the bay, and these fishermen were ringing in because I was the officer of the day, and they were telephoning in, radioing in, saying, here we're seeing a foreign object out in this bay, and we have to forewarn them that don't be alarmed, we know all about it. So this is where the first diesel engine, I believe, was instrumental in being mounted in our U.S. submarines. And he was, I believe also he was the original, Mr. Burgess was the original designer of the USS Ranger, which was the first aircraft carrier that we had.
Really?
Yep. And also, along with other pieces of equipment, I think it should be made aware of it, we had managed to mount a cannon in the nose of one of our, I think it was a B-17 or a B-25 airship that was mounted in the propeller of the airplane. And thereby the pilot was able to discharge the cannon from the cockpit of the plane. And that was original. And another important aspect of the war to be come to an end was the mounting of racks underneath TBFs. Now, TBFs was a torpedo bomber fighter plane, and these were racks that were mounted underneath the wings of these airships, and there were rockets mounted to these launching pads.
Underneath the wings?
Underneath the wings, and they were the prototypes of the first rockets that were mounted underneath the wings of these TBF fighter planes. And they were very important because there were probably about 5 underneath each wing of the plane. And thereby the pilot was able to fire each of these rockets at enemy ships or subs or whatever.
So you were involved with an awful lot of inventions down there.
The piece of equipment that required machine shop work was designed and manufactured in our machine shop, whereby eventually these parts were sent out to manufacturing plants and being used at sea. One important piece of equipment that we had originally manufactured in our machine shop were called sonar bars. Now, sonar bars were a piece of equipment that were led astern of a ship, and they were designed to sound like the screw of a ship. And they were led aft of a ship, maybe about 300–400 feet on a steel cable. In doing so, the Japanese at that time were equipped with their torpedoes to be aimed at the screw sounds of a ship. In doing so, with the sonar bars being led after the ship, they were falsely denying or defying the word I should be saying. Maybe the torpedoes that were being fired by the Japanese ships were designed to be aimed at the ship and the sounds of the screws of the U.S. merchant ships or U.S. Navy ships. And in doing so, with the sonar bars being led aft, they were
they apparently were missing their target.
Missing that because of their sounds were led aft, and their torpedoes would be let them.
It was like a decoy.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, that's the word. That's it. That's the word I'm saying. they were decoyed. And that was really something I believe that
Helped out the Navy to...
Yeah, as far as the Japanese were concerned, they couldn't understand what the hell was happening, and I'm sorry about that word about it. But there were other choice words, that were used.
Yeah, I understand.
In that area, I think that was about the three most important things that I could say that helped.
The war cause?
Yes, our cause in defeating the enemy. And that part.
Another interesting thing that we talked about earlier was this floating dry dock. And I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about it and give me this,
Sure.
the specifics of it.
Okay, a floating dry dock was a huge ship which was equipped with the most modern piece of machinery that one could find
At that period of time?
And a floating dry dock whereby it was used primarily when a ship had a problem and they couldn't, say, stay afloat, and there were, dead in the sea whereby they were enemy targets, and then they managed some way, somehow, to be led into port whereby there was a dry dock, a floating dry dock, and these ports weren't equipped to do the job that was supposed to be done in the repair of that particular ship. And one particular instance I can recall that these ships were involved with, whereby in the days of old, ships were designed with bearings made of lead and babbitt, and they weren't designed with the new ball bearings that are equipped to drive the screws of the ship. And in so doing, one of the bearings froze up on a drive shaft because the fault of probably one of the sailors or firemen on duty failed to be oiling those bearings, and it got wiped. And so doing so, where this floating dry dock was able to take the bearing apart, and in doing so, with the repair of a bearing, you had to remove all of the lead and the babbitt from these bearings, and had a melting pot whereby you mixed or smelted babbitt and lead together, and you would caulk this bearing and place it in place, and pour the lead and a babbitt mix. They were mixed together. Babbitt was used because it was a more hardened material than the lead, and after pouring this bearing, they'd have to take the bearing out and make sure that it was nice and smooth and had the oil rings mounted in it, so as to when an individual poured oil into the hole of the bearing, it wouldn't seep out to the sides. So there were grooves mounted into the babbitt and the bearings, and they had to scrape them, make sure the bearing was running smoothly. I mean, the shaft was running smoothly within the bearing, and got the ship ready to go afloat again.
This was quite a piece of equipment, the way I understand it. I just can't believe that a ship would have...
It had everything available. Had tinsmiths, they had plumbers, they had electricians, they had everything. They had an all machine shop, and it was a piece of equipment that, lo and behold, realize how important that ship was.
You also mentioned that there were more than one. I mean,
Oh yes, there were several throughout the Allied area, and that did this sort of work. So there wasn't only the one that we were associated with, but there were many.
where were you discharged from?
Yes, I was discharged from, as you know, at the time of discharge, because of my marital status, we were given points in which we were able to get early discharge.
Yeah.
And my marriage was so many points, and the length of time that I was in the service were X number of points, and so on. So I was qualified to get discharged earlier than some of our members who were probably later came on board, who enlisted later on during life. And seeing that I had entered the service at the early stages of the war, and in the months that I had accrued, I was eligible to be discharged. So I got discharged from Port Everglades, and from Port Everglades we went up to Boston, where I really got my discharge papers.
Yeah, your duty ended at Port Lauderdale, but then how'd you get up to Boston?
I took a train.
Took a train?
Train again, yes.
You remember what the date of your discharge when you got out?
Well, the date actual discharge from Boston was September 14th of 1945.
Okay. Do you have memories of that day? You know, after you're all done with your military service, you got your discharge. You have memories of that day in Boston?
As a matter of fact, my wife came down to Boston, and from Boston we took the train back to Adams, and we started life there in Adams, Mass.
How was it that day you got home, when you got into Adams? How did you feel then?
No, I was just happy to be home. There wasn't any parades or no group formed, you know, because there were so many of us that.
So many coming back at the time?
Coming back, the Army, Navy, and Coast Guard, and so I was just happy to be home and start life anew. And
was it hard to adjust back to civilian life after being in the military for 4 years or so?
Well, not really. Being married was going to be a new way of life, and I thought probably this is going to be a challenge and something new in my life. And Albino was working in the General Electric Company here in the defense plant at the time, and so I, being, you know, the great provider, I was just, well, you got to quit, you know, the GE and stay home, and being like the mother you would be. And we try to have a child, you know, but we weren't fortunate enough to have one until 3 years after our married life. And we're fortunate to have a son who was 50-some-odd years old for now, and we're happy about that. But unfortunately, we don't have any grandchildren, and but that's all right. And we have a great granddaughter, and
daughter-in-law?
Daughter-in-law.
Yeah. That's good. Now, did you go to work right away when you got home?
Yes, as a matter of fact, well, let me go back a little bit. At the time when we were discharged, It was a club. Club was called 5220.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
5220 was you get $20 a month, a week, for 52 weeks of the year. So I said, well, I'm not going to wait around. $20 a week. How can I afford to live on $20 a week? So I only collected one of those checks, and I went to work. There was a new company coming up from Cambridge, Mass. It was called the Dewey and Elmy Chemical Company. And they bought a plant here in Adams, Mass. And at first I tried to get a job in a General Electric. But as you know, when the war was ending, war products weren't needed and they were laying off. So I applied for this job as a machinist in the Dewey and Elmy Chemical Company. And I went to work for them. Surprisingly, listen to this. It was top wage at that time, $1.10 an hour. $1.10 an hour.
That was top wages?
Yeah.
That was a good wage, isn't it?
That was a good wage. So that went on for a long time. And Dewey and Elmy Chemical Company made products that was going into the shoe industry at that time. It were rolls of paper that they would purchase from the Brightwater Paper Company in Adams also. And they would impregnate this paper and impregnate it with a latex of some sort. And the end product would come out where it would be an insole that would fit inside your shoe. And they would make the complete product, and they'd stamp the insoles of different sizes and ship them out to different factories. And after that, W.R. Grace Company, who was a large conglomerate worldwide, decided that they wanted to buy Dewey and Elmy Chemical Company. And Dewey and Elmy Chemical Company, they were nationwide also. So they purchased this chemical company along with this company that was up in Adams.
Yeah.
And in Adams, things changed drastically, and they made products that were going into the printing industry, printing of paper magazines like Outdoor Life, Set Eating, Post, and other popular magazines
Yeah.
at the time. So they became real popular, and it was a lucrative operation, and they made good money there, and they employed about 150 people, and that's where I spent 35 years of my life.
You had 35 years of service with them?
Yes, and I became chief engineer there at the plant, and so our group really basically made and improved on machinery and making new parts for machinery and installing different product lines in which would increase the production of that product.
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill when you got out of the service before you went to...
Not really. Basically, while I could say this, that while I was employed with W.R. Grace, I went to the normal school in North Adams, in which now is the Mass Liberal Arts School,
Yeah.
and received credits there, and college credits in production, budgeting, and management. So I was pleased with the results that I attained there, which applied
to your work?
To the work ethics that I had.
So the company themselves basically paid for your, did they pay for your education or the college courses?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Okay. Now you did mention that you did have a family. You had one son?
That's right. He is presently, he had a successful law practice up in Lebanon, New Hampshire. His name is Albert Jr., and since then he became a district court judge up in the Hanover area in Lebanon.
Did you keep in touch with any of your buddies, you know, the people you were in the service with?
Well, unfortunately, no. I could never. Well, yes, there was a couple of times that I tried to seek out this individual that lived in Biloxi, Mississippi, and unfortunately, I never could make contact with him. So there was a period of time while we used to spend our winters in Florida for 21 years. There was a period of time that we decided one day we were going to go to the casinos in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I decided to look them up, and I went to the American Legions there, and they had remembered the name because they had owned one of his brothers of the kid that I was in the service with was a surgeon, highly successful surgeon in Mississippi, and went to the American Legion and checked there, and they remembered the name Werline, and they didn't know the store had closed. They sold musical instruments, and the store had closed, and one of them had mentioned to me that I guess they had gone to New Orleans, and from there I just lost track of
just couldn't find him.
He was a great friend of mine.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there was an active naval service here in Pittsfield that for a year and a half I had joined them, and then I joined American Legion in Adams, Mass.
Do you feel that your military service had a positive or a negative effect on your life today?
Yes, no question about it. I thought there was a great deal of camaraderie and getting along with your fellow man, you know, in our everyday life, whereby I could see individuals who never had the experience of naval service or any type of branch of service, that their way of life wasn't similar to what I as an individual had experienced, and to get along with your fellow man.
Yeah.
And doing the things that would help your fellow man.
I think the camaraderie part of the military is...
No question.
It's a great experience.
No question in my mind. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The knowledge and experience that I got from them.
Well, Al, I would like to thank you for sharing this with me and us, and thank you for serving the country.
Thank you very, very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure.